Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another class. Before we begin, I just want to remind you that next week we will not be studying Tanya. We'll skip 1 week. We just finished off last week about the idea that God, when He created us last, but yet we are the choices of the creation, the crown, the pinnacle of creation. The Talmud is asking, how is it possible? And I shared with you the way the Rebbe explains that when man behaves and he conducts himself the way God wanted him to, he is the choices of the creation. He is on top. Everything was created for him, for the human. What happens when the person misbehaves, disobeys God, does not follow the purpose, the mission? Then we tell him even a fly, even a mosquito, which does not excrete, just takes and grabs, he came before you, he was created before you, preceded you, and therefore you are of no value. The Rebbe explains it the way we look at the body is lower than anybody else because the body was created last. But the soul preceded all the creation because the soul was the whole reason God created the universe. And therefore, when a man connects to his soul, he's serving God and he's becoming to be on top of the creation, before the creation, the purpose of the creation. What happens when a person pays attention to pleasures and disobeying God and his body? Now we say to him, you created last, you are not that important. The Rebbe went on to explain, and I started speaking about the fact that when we disobey God, we are in a worse off situation than the evil inclination or the devil or the angel of death, whichever name you give it, are, because they do not disobey God. When we make a choice to listen to them, we are disobeying God. Therefore, it makes us to be the worst than anybody else. So, notwithstanding that we possess a soul which is part of God, when we misbehave, when we act not in accordance with Hashem's way, what happens is we go farther away from God than anybody else. So you have a dog and you have a human, and they both did something that God does not like. One had gone way farther from God than the other simply because the dog there has no choice. That's the way they were created in a certain way, and that they follow their nature. When a human misbehaves, they went far from God. And the point is that every time we don't follow God's commandments, we cut ourselves away from God. And as we spoke at great details, it's like idol worship. What is idol worship? The simple meaning is to take an image or an object and bow down and say, it is my God. It created me, it controls me, it sustains me. That's a simple. But according to Kabbalah, idol is a place where we push God away from and say there is an existence or an entity or a place where God is not. And that happens anytime we disobey God. If God says, don't eat, not eat kosher, and we engage in eating non-kosher, we disobey God. So we have created an idol at that point. And that the rabbi is going to continue on the same theme over and over. I want to share with you, those of us who enjoy study Talmud, we're going to go to a very deep Talmudic discussion, and I'll share it with you with an introduction so you can follow, and we'll skim through a little fast. But before, again, one more point. There are 3 levels of distance from God. You have non-kosher animals. God, for example, God, or an activity that's not kosher. God says, distant, do not engage, because it is far from me. Lying, cheating, encroaching on someone's business. It is very defiled, very despicable for God, and you must stay away from it. So that's one stage of being distant from God, non-kosher animals. Then you have a second category, a mosquito, which does not give back. It only takes to himself. He eats and sucks blood, but will not give anything to anybody else. There is no benefit to the creation from that creature because all it does is grabs and grabs and grabs. That's a second category that's farther away from God. Then you have a human being. When a human being, particularly a Jewish person, disobeys God, is into a third stage farther than the mosquito, because the mosquito did not disobey God. Mosquito has a very despicable nature of not giving back, only taking, but that's the way God created it. It did not change, did not engineered by themselves to act this way. When a man decides not to obey God, they are farther from the mosquito, the third level, farther away. And that works with every sin, regardless, a light sin, a sin or a harsher sins. They all are equally the same. We are breaking away from God, creating an idol, thus distancing ourselves farther than animals, non-kosher animals, and farther than even a mosquito. The rabbi is going to, I want to give you 2 points. You know what, we will talk about the first point. The second one is a Talmudic discussion. It's much deeper, so I'll share with you introductions when we get there. The first one is the rabbi is saying that animals, the animal kingdom was given, how many commandments animals were given? Anybody can guess? One is right, thank you. Which is, do not kill, they kill.
Do not kill humans.
Do not kill humans, that's correct. It's not given to animals, it's given to men. As the rabbi is going to quote from the Torah, at the beginning in the book of Genesis, when God created animals, he says to them, you fear and awe of men should rest upon you. That's the only commandment animal have been given by God, and which is, do not kill humans. It's one commandment. As the Rebbe, how is it possible we see animals devour humans? They kill humans. If you go into the safari or the savannah, and you stay there by at night, the hippopotamus is going to scratch you into a flat piece of paper. A lion is going to make sure that there is not a single bone left of you. How is it possible the animals disobey God? Says the Rebbe, it is because humans have distanced themselves so far from God that God's image is gone. Therefore, they see another creature, they see another animal, and they are fighting for territory. They are fighting for food, and therefore they will fight. The only reason animals can kill humans is because the human looks to them as another animal. What happened to a holy man which did not disobey God and does have God's image over their faces? Animals shy away and they will respect him. There are untold number of stories of holy Jewish men. Anyone heard of Daniel? Daniel in the lion's den, he sat down there like puppies, like little kittens.
Nobody tried that afterwards.
Uh-huh.
Nobody tried that yet.
Some did. We don't know. They didn't come back. They didn't come back to tell us of the outcome. In other words, there is a famous story of the Or HaChaim, Rabbi Chaim Ben Attar, a very holy man from Morocco, who later emigrated to Israel. He's buried in Israel. His yahrzeit is just happened, I think. He was a jeweler. He was a very holy man. By the way, his commentary to the Torah is one of the most, everybody loves it because he mixes Kabbalah into the simple text. And the Or HaChaim is studied by all Jews today. He was a jeweler. He used to work with silver and diamonds. One day, the king of Morocco ordered a piece of jewelry as a gift, but he gave him a very small amount of days to finish it. And he did not. He just couldn't, because after that he was a rabbi, he was the leader of the community. So he had to juggle a few things. He couldn't finish it. So the king ordered him to be thrown into his lion den. He had lions as pets. And from time to time, when people angered the king, he would feed the lions with those men. So he asked permission to bring his talis, tefillin, and a book of Psalms. And the guards were laughing. They couldn't stop laughing. What do you need? A book of Psalm. I mean, you go there, and they threw him into the pit. They brought him inside. And the lions went and sat down. One of them made himself as a chair, as a recliner for the rabbi, and he was sitting and reciting Psalm while he's wearing talit and tefillin. The king couldn't believe it, and he came to see. He was told by the guards there was no howling, and he came and he saw him. So he ordered, of course, to take him out. He apologized to him, and for the rest of his life, he's respected him. There is another story of Rabbi Chaim Galanti, a Jew from Tzfat who was sent to outside of Israel to Europe to collect for the people in Israel. He came to a town, he couldn't find anybody in the streets, and he was told that there were 2 lions who ran away from the zoo, and everybody's chasing them, and they're afraid. As he was looking around, he suddenly sees an animal, a little dog. He thought it was a little dog. And he went and grabbed it by the mane, whatever. And he took it into the zoo. He took it back to the zoo. And the Jewish people and the community, all the guards and the soldiers who were there to try and shoot it happened about 150 years ago. They told him that when a holy man has God's image on their face, animals will not touch the human. And therefore, they're able to. That explains a peculiar story that I am sure you never paid attention to, but it's in the text of the Torah. In the Torah, we read that Joseph comes to his brothers, and they are devising a plan to kill him. And they said, "Inei ba'al hachalomot alazeba." Here is the dreamer, the man of dreams, because he had dreams. I'm sure anyone's verses story. And Ava lecha v'nargenu, let's kill him, and let's see what happens to his dreams. Reuven turns to the brothers, and the Torah testifies he wanted to save him. So he turned, Vaishma Reuven heard, Vayatzilenu miyadam, and he saved him from them, meaning what he's about to tell them is to save Reuven, to save Yosef. What does he say? He say, why should we put the blood on our hands? Let's throw him into the pit, and he will die there by the animals. The pit was full of scorpions and snakes, and they will kill him this way. Ve'yadenu al tehibo. Our hand will not be part of the killing. That's what Reuben says. Now, and that's what they did. And Yosef didn't die, and then they sold them to the Midianites. That's the story. Ali, are you familiar with the story? Anybody not familiar with the story? You're all familiar with the story. Huh?
I know.
You know the story. You've been there.
Not quite.
The question is, how can the Torah testify that Reuven wants to save Yosef by throwing him into a pit full of snakes and scorpions? There is no chance the man is going to survive. He didn't go with poison. He didn't come with a gun. He's unable to fight. Yet the Torah says that he told them, he saved him from their hands. Kabbalah, the only one that is able to explain it. Kabbalah says, by the way, it's based on the Talmud. The Talmud says that the only creature who has a choice is a human. Reuven says the brothers wanted to kill Yosef because they felt that he deserved to die, and they created a court. Anybody familiar with the court they created? Yes. They had a court, and they had a discussion about him bringing slander to the father, and the ruling was he deserved to die. That before he came. That's why they were talking about killing him. Now, Reuven felt that the choice they made is up to them, but animals have no choice. If he does not deserve to die, the animals will not touch him. And therefore, he says, let me get it out of their hands, because they have a choice. They can do something very evil. Animals have no choice. If the animals will get rid of him, then he deserves to die. And that's why the Torah testified that he saved him. In other words, our holy man, Yosef was a holy man, didn't deserve to die, and he had God's image. Therefore, Reuven actually saved him. He put him next to vipers, very dangerous, very poisonous snakes and scorpions, yet they didn't touch him. And the Torah says that he saved them because the animals have no choice. We have choice. When I choose to disobey God, I cut myself off of God. When an animal chooses to kill, they did not disobey God. They obey God only one commandment, and that is don't hurt a human being. As long as a person looks like a human being. If the person does not look like a human being, too bad. Here is a funny story. I don't want to share. I know it's going to sound like I'm a very holy man, but this is the fact. There was across the street from here, there used to be two mobile homes that were shacks. People who are almost homeless used to live there. And one day they put where the two homes. There are two brand new homes next to the parking lot. And one day, one of the members here, by the name of Sam Clafter, may God give him many years, said to me, let's look at the property because it's for sale and we can build two homes for families who want to. So he said, let's go walk over and look at the property. There was a sign for sale, nobody, it was abandoned. So we crossed the street, and as soon as we crossed the street, there was a husky, a big Siberian husky that jumped the fence from the neighbor. The next door neighbor on the other side jumped over and was charging directly at us. Sam had a gun in his car. And his car was right there in the park. And he just lost himself and ran to the car. And I stood there laughing. I learned from my grandfather that if you're not afraid of dogs, they're not going to hurt you. And the dog came to me, sniffed me, walked around, and then he charged, went straight to Sam. Sam was as close as can be before he fired at him. And Sam, for many years, Sam would remind me about how the dogs love me.
So if you laugh, they don't do anything?
I'm not, I just like to tell the story. What? What?
So if you laugh when a dog comes.
I
towards
just
you-
stood there. I wasn't afraid. It was a real big, it was a big, it was a husky, a Siberian husky, a real big one. I stood there. He just went past me. There was another story here. I know I was told that they sense if you feel. They really
Oh,
sense
they-
it.
Yes,
Because once you fear, your body produces some sort of smell. that
Right.
makes sense.
We had with a snake a similar story. We picked up the big menorah. You see the tubdud menorah. There was a platform, and the platform was shaky. So we lifted that platform, and it was very moisty under because the wood made it very wet. And there was a black racer there. There was a snake, and I stood literally right next to it. He couldn't care less. But the other guy, the helper that I had, was on the other side. He was about 3 feet away from the snake, and he jumped at him. He literally turned and jumped at him. And I saw the way he ran that he was afraid of him. Later, he's the one who grabbed him. He took gloves and he grabbed him and took him away and put him a little far. We didn't want to kill. We don't want to kill black racers. They're good. But I was literally, when they lifted, the guy lifted the platform, and I was standing there. I was literally 6 inches, and we woke him up. This was in the middle of the winter, so in February. So they were there sleeping, I think, and it didn't bother me. He just went after somebody else. Anyway.
You attract animals as well as you attract people.
Huh?
You attract animals as much as people.
Okay, I went a little far. Let's go back to our this study.
What page?
We are going to start reading from page 328. And surely the other unclean creatures and even the voracious beasts are higher than the sinner. All of these do not deviate from their divine intended purpose, but obey God's command. Although they cannot perceive it, for the animal cannot perceive God's command, yet their spirit perceives it. Every creature, every leaves has a spiritual a spiritual essence or energy that communicates from God directly to it. So that includes animals. So they will not disobey God, and they will not deviate from God's instruction. And therefore, when a man deviates, he's farther down than the animals. That is, the life force animating them, which is aware of the divine will, does not permit them to act in violation of it. As it is written, the only commandment God gave animals, he gave it to human, but the animals have taken that command from humans. The fear and dread of Adam and Eve, shall lie upon every beast and of the earth. And as our sages explain, a wild beast will never defy a human being unless he appears to it like an animal. So Noah was able to bring in elephants, lions, tigers, cheetah, snakes, sharks, not creatures of the sea, because they obeyed. He was their master. They were very thankful that he allowed them, and therefore there was no challenge and there is no fear. He didn't have to put them in cages because they follow God's command. In fact, when confronting tzaddikim, from whose face of the divine image never departs, the evil beasts are humbled before them, as is stated in the Zohar concerning Daniel in the lion's den. And I shared with you, it happened in modern day. It happened with the Rabbi Chaim. It's very famous, it's the documented story. It happened with Arab Galanti, that went from Israel, from Tzfat, I think, to Turkey. Same story. He was able to find the running away lions from the zoo. There is holy people are able. There is other stories in Russia and Ukraine where holy men were able to chase away wild beasts. Not only did the lions not harm him, but on the contrary, they humbled themselves before him. At any rate, what emerges from the above is that even the animal do not violate God's will. And therefore, when God gave the animals a commandment, don't hurt humans, they will never do it. The only reason they hurt humans is because human looks to them like another beast. Yes.
So if an animal was affirmative, can you do tshuva?
Of course. Yeah. Of course you can do tshuva. You should do tshuva, because by doing so, you are able to overcome them. As long as you don't lose your mind, of course, right? There is a famous story of a rabbi, a teacher, a Rebbe, teaching these little children in Cheder, in day school. And he said to them that it says in the Torah, "Ulechol bnei Israel lo yechratz kelev leshono." All the Jewish people in Egypt, when they cross outside, live in Egypt. Egypt was a superpower of the universe. How come they were not able to live? It was surrounded by wild dogs, very dangerous dogs. And no one can escape because the dogs would devour the human. No one can escape Egypt. When God took them out in the middle of the day, it says that God was kinder to the Jewish people. Not only the dogs allowed them to cross and leave the border, but they didn't even holler. They didn't make noise because it would scare the children. The Torah says that because of the Jewish people, no. So if you say that verse, when you see a dog charging or barking at you and you're afraid, say that verse and they'll get quiet. So he told the children, anytime you see a dog, and and the dog is charging, or the dog is barking, and you're afraid, say that verse, and they will stop, they'll go away. Well, the students are very excited. So at the end of the day, they all get out, close the books, and go outside to go home. As they're walking home, there is a dog running in, and the rabbi is the first one to run up, finding a tree, climbing all the way to the top. So afterwards, the children say, Rabbi, what happened? He says, what can I do? This dog don't speak Hebrew. So anyway, I used to go with my grandfather in Petach Tikva. It's a town in Israel my grandfather lived. And every time he begged my parents to let me spend Shabbat with them. And Petach Tikva, the village where I go, there were no dogs. There were dogs as guards, but they were unleashed. They were dangerous dogs. But in Petach Tikva, everybody had 2 dogs, just like, in this town. So on Shabbat, you would walk to synagogue, and there were big dogs all over, and I was very scared. So my grandfather always said to me, say the verse, you will see they stay away from you. And he trained me, so I'm not afraid of dogs. My wife, God forbid, she would go to the second, she would run away. Anyway, back to our discussion. Let's continue. It is thus clear that he who sins and transgresses against God's will, even in a minor offense, is, at the time he commits it, completely removed from the divine holiness, meaning God's unity and oneness. So he's totally separated from God as soon as they sin. Even more so than all the unclean creatures, the vermin and reptiles, which derive their sustenance from the sitracha and klipa of avodah zarah. When an animal disobeys, they still serve God. When men disobey, they distance themselves farther from God as possible. All the aforesaid demonstrate how one's hidden love for God can enable him to overcome his desire to transgress any sin. When he considers that thereby he becomes separated from God even more than the unclean creatures, he will recoil from every sin just as he recoils from a thought of idolatry, because of his awareness that it represents an attack on his love of God and his faith in him. In other words, in that way, all sins are equally the same, cutting ourselves and separating ourselves from God. Now, the Rabbi, I'm going to share with you an introduction, and we'll do it very quick. The Rabbi is asking 2 questions that can arise. Number one, how can you say that in all of the sin, we are separating ourselves from God, and it's similar to idol worship? We do see that there is only 3 commandments in which we must give up our life: adultery, idolatry, and murder. Everything else, we must obey and save our life. So if the doctor says you have to break the law of kosher and eat non-kosher to survive, we must eat non-kosher. If a doctor says in order for you to survive, you have to lie, if someone is going to kill you unless you're going to lie to him, you have to lie to them. How is it possible to say that when I cheat another person, or I lie, or I eat non-kosher, it's equal to all the commandments like idol worship? The second question that I was asking is, if all the commandments were separating ourselves equally from God, how come the punishment is different? There are sins that we get lashes, which very rare. There are sins we get cut off from God at the age of 50. There are sins that we get cut off from God at the age of 60. There are sins that there is execution. There are sins there is warning. There are different punishments. If there are different punishments, it means different levels of separation from God. The same is about reward. We all know that the reward for mitzvot, for good deeds, is not the same on all. Some commandments are warned much greater reward than others, which means there's levels of distant or connection to God And yet the Rebbe says that in all the sins, we distance ourselves completely from God, and all the commandments, we are connected to God equally. It doesn't make sense. The Rabbi is going to answer the following. The Rabbi is going to say that the act, and this is very powerful, the act of disobeying God is all the same in all the commandments. Murder, lying, cheating, eating not kosher, not celebrating Passover, all the commandments, the act of the sin is equally the same. The effect, what effect does it have, varies. It depends on the sin. Some of them will have a big effect, some of them are small effect, some of them are different effect. And the way to explain that is the following is what I saw, is that when a man goes to the army to become a soldier, he is enlisted to serve in the army. What happens if he gets a commandment to run or to fire and they disobey? Disobeying the order of the commander would warrant a punishment because you don't listen. In the army, number one is following instructions. It doesn't matter if you agree or don't agree, you must follow. However, the effect of not listening is much, much different and far less than if he disobeyed at time of war, actual war. In other words, the commander in charge says fire, and the man did not fire in training. While they were training, he didn't fire. The effect is much different than when they are in the bunker, actually about to go up and fight the enemy, and he refused to fire. At that point, for disobeying, it's disobeying, but it's not just that. The effect that may save their lives or may cause some people to die for disobeying is much, much different. And therefore, the punishment or the reward is much different, even though the act is the same. Says the Rebbe, when we don't listen to Hashem, it doesn't matter what it is. It can be Passover, it can be kosher, it can be Shabbat, it can be murder, it can be adultery, it can be idolatry. In all levels, disobeying is separating ourselves from God, cutting ourselves off. What does the effect have? What impact does it have on the universe and on my soul? It depends on the differences of the sins based on our background and relationship with God. Someone who has no idea that he's committing a sin, someone who is raised in a traditional place and he knows full well, it's just that the effect on the soul, on my soul, varies based on my experience, my upbringing, my relationship with God. But that does not change the fact that in all sin we created an idol. Did I make myself clear? And the Rabbi is going to go into a Talmudic discussion to prove that point. I'm not going to get, I'm sure I'm going to lose some of you, so I'm going to do it very quick, but to me it's it's a wonderful point because it can be used in many other ways. Which one of the commandments is more important in your opinion? Adultery or Shabbat? What do you think?
What is more important?
Yeah. Adultery or Shabbat? Shabbat is more important. Why? Shabbat is holier, so therefore Shabbat is more important than adultery, than staying away from forbidden relationship, right? That's what you're saying. Everybody agrees with Harry? Why not?
Because either way, if you commit against.
So I'm asking you which one? You disagree with him. Which one, Shabbat or adultery?
To do or do not to do?
To not do. To not break the Shabbat versus do not have a forbidden relationship.
Adultery, because you.
Adultery, why?
Because you're not gonna be able to do Shabbat. Because they're gonna be executed.
I don't understand
You're
that.
gonna be executed. If you do adultery.
You did it quietly, nobody saw. So here it is. Jewish tells us that there are three sins that we must give up our life. One of them is adultery. So if someone says sleep with a married woman, we must, even at the cost of our life, not commit that crime. Is that clear? Shabbat is quite the opposite. We violate Shabbat to save a life. You do not violate adultery.
She says the main thing, as long as Jamie's happy.
You understand that, Harry? So that was opposite of what you said, right? Do you understand that? Adultery is way more important to keep than Shabbat. How do I know? Because at the line, if life is on the line, for an adultery, we don't spare the life. We say, give up your life and do not commit that sin. When it comes to Shabbat, the doctor says either you violate Shabbat or the person will die. What do? You violate Shabbat. So meaning that adultery is more important, right? You understand that? I don't want to go into side issues. Let me prove to you the opposite. Ivan, did you understand what I said? There is a law, and I'm not going to entertain the side questions because then we're not going to finish here. If someone wants to become a slaughterer, a ritual slaughterer, we call it shoichet. Shoichet, a slaughterer. He has to be a very pious man. And I think I showed you to in many occasions that a slaughterer is holier than the rabbi. My father is a slaughterer because a rabbi, every time he rules, he has to prove the basis. Where did he get the ruling? Whenever the rabbi rules something, he has to say it's written such, and that's how he drew the conclusion. A shoichet, you don't know if the knife is done, you trust. In other words, it's based on trust. And therefore, God-fearing, a shoichet must be more God-fearing than a rabbi. Is that clear? Yes, Ivan? Now, by Jewish law, there are prerequisites, there are conditions by which a shoichet can need to qualify before he is a shoichet. One of them is he has to be a God-fearing and serve God. One of the rules are if a man violates Shabbat law, he cannot be a shoichet. Someone who does not keep Shabbat can't be a shoichet. Harry, do you understand that? Perfect. What if the man transgresses adultery?
He cannot.
The ruling is he can.
That is not fair.
That's code of law. The Jewish law tells us that the prerequisite for a shoichet, for a ritual slaughterer, is that he must be a God-fearing man. If he does not keep Shabbat, he violates Shabbat law, he disqualified. He cannot be a shoichet. If he is committing an adultery, he can be a shoichet. In other words, he's living with a married woman, a woman that it's very, again, don't take me wrong, it's a grave sin and the price is going to be very hefty. But there are people who living with a woman who did not get a get from the previous husband. She's a married woman. It's adultery.
How is he God fearing then?
Huh?
How is he God fearing?
I don't know. That's a good question. It's a very good question.
How is he God fearing?
How can you call him God-fearing if he does that? Yeah, it's a good question. I am not going to address that. This is a topic that's discussed. The point is, the Rebbe is going to say, you tell me that Shabbat is lighter than adultery because Shabbat is violated for save a life. Adultery is not violated to save a life. On the other hand, God said that if someone violates Shabbat, he's not fit to be a kosher slaughterer. But if he violates adultery, he is fit. How is it possible? It's a contradiction. Harry, do you understand the contradiction? Is it a little too deep? Just a minute before you speak. Therefore, says the Rebbe, the only reason that there are different restrictions and prerequisites and conditions or punishments have nothing to do with the seriousness of the sin. It's just that's the way God said, and He did not necessarily give us the reason. And therefore, if a sin, this punishment is much smaller than another sin, it doesn't mean it's a small sin. It might be a much, much bigger sin. And God decided that this is a small punishment compared to someone else. Did you understand this? Everybody understand? Herman, you following?
I'm following,
You digesting?
I'm uncomfortable with the setting because,
I understand you're not comfortable. I'm not comfortable either. That's the point. Yes, Harry.
These things children give up life for is idolatry, murder, or what you said about.
And adultery.
I thought what I should go is if you tell someone, I'll kill you unless you rape that woman, you have to give up life. You know, it was adultery.
But and it's not rape. I kill you unless you sleep with that married woman.
That
It's for sure.
I believe the same. So that's the reason I'm thinking about Shabbat versus adultery.
Okay. So adultery and maybe consensual. It's not about raping. It's not about against the woman's will. Adultery is because she's married, or she's a sister, or a mother, or mother-in-law, or a daughter, or she's married. It is in the category of adultery. And by Jewish law, if someone is forcing a man to sleep with that girl, he must give up his life. If the Shabbat came, and the only way to save someone's life, we must violate Shabbat, we violate Shabbat. So it sounds Shabbat is a much inferior to the three commandments. Yet we find, regarding to a shochet, shchita, ritual slaughtering, the prerequisite is that pre-qualified, God-fearing man. So if he violates Shabbat law, he's not qualified. If he violates adultery law, he's qualified. You can laugh as much as you want. I'm just showing you the halacha. Code of law tells it that to us. Therefore, says the rabbi, you need to realize that the act itself, slander, not eating kosher, adultery, are all equally the same. We cut ourselves away from God. We are in the third category, non-kosher animals, mosquitoes, human being that sin. We are as far as you can go. And it doesn't matter the kind of sin, we disobey God, period, and we separate ourselves. The fact that later the punishment is different is only what the effect had on me. Just like I told you, disobeying and not firing my gun when the instructor at the army tells me, and I didn't do it, I did not cause anybody to die. But if I do it while at war, it's the same disobedience. But yet, at that time, lives are going to be wasted because I did not obey the king. I want to share one more point. I think even though it's late, I thought that we're going to finish this chapter. Maybe yes, maybe not. But this is a point because I've been discussing this idea similar to that will affect answers to questions that have been asked. Many years back, I don't know how to keep it short, but in 1960, I think 62, there was a television that in New York, a TV station that ran a program on Hasidism, on Hasidic movement. And they got two rabbis to interview live on television in a program. And part of the program, I believe, was people calling in with questions to the rabbis. And one of the callers, a student, I believe, asked the rabbis, I understand about some of the commandments, don't steal, don't cheat, but how can the Torah tells us that if I ate non-kosher, I'm going to get lashes? The punishment for not keeping kosher is lashes. It's my private home. I didn't steal the food. I paid for it. I bought it. So I disobey God. It's my business. How can the rabbi take me to court and they're going to give me lashes? And one of the rabbi responded by saying that lashes was very, very rare. The Torah says the lashes must be applied but it's a very rare occurrence because it happens only with warning, and it happens when the guy says, no, I'm still want to do it, and he got 3 warnings, and he has to do it within 10 seconds, because if he waited 20 seconds, it's too late, they have to give him warning again. It's a very unusual, and today we studied in Talmud that no more than twice. After 2 times, they don't give him that. So lashes is very rare. That's what the rabbi answered. On Shabbat, that Shabbat, the Rebbe decided to address. Suddenly, the Rebbe in public gathering on a Fabringen says that what the rabbi answered, that it was very rare, is correct. It's very rare. But there is a whole different answer. And the Rebbe says, I'm reversing the way the Rebbe explained because I want to save time. The Rebbe says that same week was the first time man was sent to the moon. And anytime things happen in the universe, it teaches us in our relationship with God. And therefore it says, the Rebbe says, for men sent to the moon, we can understand about lashes. How so? The Rebbe says the Torah tells us that every human being must consider as if God created the entire universe just for him. I wasn't created here together with my siblings and my parents. I was created here to be the king or the queen of the universe, and I'm the only one who rules the universe. Says the Rebbe, the people who land on the moon, they picked the choices of mankind. They picked the best, most talented humans to man the space shuttle, the spacecraft, or whatever it's called. And how many months and years of training they went through. And they really were very fit mentally, psychologically, in all aspects. And then they were sent up to space. Now, while they're in the spacecraft, they are being instructed every iota of their movement. They need to get permission before they go to the bathroom. I'm adding it. They need to get permission before they turn around. Every button, not even every button, every time they pick up their hand or their feet, they need to follow instruction. In fact, everything is completely directed from down below. Says the Rebbe, I don't understand. The pilot that's in the spacecraft can say, who are the people down there to tell me what to do? They're not here, meaning I'm on top of them. I am much better. So how can they tell me I can make decision on my own? And says the Rebbe, we all know that there will be nothing left of the person if he would start acting this way. But rather realizing that he affects the entire mission, one move affects the entire mission. Says the Rebbe, every Jewish person, every human being, he's a pilot who is in a spacecraft. The body is a spacecraft. And the Rebbe went on, which I'm skipping now, how in details. And we follow instructions. Otherwise, you'll be destroy the entire universe. The whole universe can be destroyed with one little move. Says the Rebbe, then the question is, why lashes? How come it's such a minor punishment for disobeying God? The effect that when we disobey God is so grave on my soul that it's a wonder, how can we correct it with only lashes? It should have been way, way more, much, much bigger punishment. And that's the point, because we're dealing with lashes here, that the Rebbe pointed out that we were sent here, and every time we don't follow the instructions, we bring destruction to the entire mission. Even though we can say, oh, I'm smarter than anybody else because I have the experience. I went to school and I'm smart, but it doesn't work that way. Let's continue. That's what the rabbi is going to be talking about in the next few lines. See if you can follow through. True. Page 330. We find a principle that saving a life overrides other prohibitions, though not the prohibition of idolatry. And similarly, the law sometimes calls for one to commit a transgression rather than to be killed. Whereas with idolatry, incest, and murder, the law requires that he submit to death rather than commit any one of the three. So we see variations of the requirements. This would seem to indicate that the Torah itself distinguishes between idolatry and most other commandments. While the Alter Rebbe previously stated that the adulteress who makes such a distinction has been blinded by the spirit of folly, for in reality, every sin tears one away from God in the same way as idolatry. Says Rabbi, Sota, we spoke about last week, called Sota, the women that went astray, is because she's foolish. She went and acted in a foolish way by listening to the evil. What's the foolish way? She's thinking it's only one act. It's only a simple thing. She's not going to be separated from God, but it's not true. Says Rabbi, look in the Torah, you'll see that there is difference between idolatry and adultery versus all the other commandments.
I can see that, it seems to me that you're referring to degrees of sin.
Right. The different degrees of sin.
That degrees of sin,
If.
this is worse than the other.
That's the point. You got it.
Okay,
You got it.
got it. I understand it, but I don't appreciate the fact that the degrees of sin, because one can look at the sins, what's the corresponding degree. I'm going to commit this one, I'm not going to commit the other one, because the punishment
Is-
if we're.
And the rabbi is going to say to you, this is not the way we look at it. Because the fact that one will have a bigger punishment does not make it a bigger sin. The first the rabbi is saying is that every sin equally tears us apart from God. Number two, the rabbi proves from the slaughterer versus Shabbat that it's self-contradictory about the types of punishment. And therefore, we must reach the conclusion that what I see as a small sin is not necessarily a small sin. And what I see as a grave sin is not necessarily a grave sin. In the following paragraph, the Alter Rebbe states that there is no contradiction here. The requirement or non-requirements of sacrifice one's life for a prohibition does not reflect its intrinsic worth. Says the Rebbe, the fact that saving a life overrides other prohibitions is because, as the sages explain, the Torah declares, desecrate one Shabbat for his sake, so that he may live to observe other Shabbatot. The Rebbe says that on Shabbat we violate the Shabbat to save a life, not because the sin is not grave, it's because Shabbat is begging you to violate her, so that the man should stay alive and can keep many, many more, which is unique to Shabbat. It's not because Shabbat is not that important. When the medical treatment of a patient involves an activity normally forbidden on Shabbat, the Torah requires that we desecrate the Shabbat to cure him so that he may live to observe Shabbat in the future. Thus, the precept of Shabbat has not been waived in the face of an external consideration. It is in the interest of Shabbat itself, that is, the patient's future observance of Shabbat, that we desecrate this one Shabbat. And it only applies to Shabbat, not to murder, and not to adultery, and not to idolatry. But on Shabbat says, I want you to violate me so that you keep the Shabbat, that person stay alive, and he can keep many, many other Shabbat. It is not because of the relative leniency of the Shabbat or gravity of the sin, such as idolatry, that one is waived while the other is not. And the Rebbe points out, as I told you about the slaughterer, this contention is supported by the following fact. Violation of the Shabbat is a grave offense and comparable to idolatry with regards to the law of shchita, of slaughtering, by anyone who habitually violates a particular precept as codified by Yoredea in the Code of Law, Section 2. There, the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Law, states that one who regularly desecrates the Shabbat is unfit for shchita, is unfit for ritual slaughtering, as though he habitually practiced idolatry. A habitual sexual offender, on the other hand, does not have the same law applied to him as a habitual idolater, indicating that the violation of Shabbat is greater than sexual offenses. If someone is committing a violation of adultery, he's allowed to continue to slaughter animals. If someone violates Shabbat, he's not. So now you cannot, it sounds Shabbat is much more important. Yet we see Shabbat is violated to save a life, but not adultery. Yet the consideration of life overrides Shabbat, but not the sexual prohibition. Thus, it cannot be argued that the requirements of to sacrifice oneself for the sexual prohibitions is due to their gravity, for we see that the desecration of Shabbat is even graver than them with regards to Shechita. Hence, we must conclude that the laws governing self-sacrifice are no measure of the relative gravity of the mitzvot, but rather it is a scriptural decree that consideration of life override other sins, but not the three cardinal sins: idolatry, sexual offense, and murder. Says the Rebbe, the reason we don't save a life when it comes to adultery, idolatry, and murder is God said so. It's nothing to do because they are very, very bad, big sins. It's not true. Other commandments might be even bigger. The sinner, however, who does distinguish between the gravity of the various transgressions, sacrificing his life for the prohibition of idolatry, but not even restraining his desire for others, surely has his thinking clouded by the spirit of folly of the klippah, which obscures his hidden love of God. For in reality, every transgression creates an ultimate separation between the sinner and God. Says the Rebbe, therefore we must understand that anytime we sin, we are separating ourselves from God. It doesn't matter if it's adultery, idolatry, or keeping kosher, or lying, or cheating, or not keeping Shabbat. After the sinful act, however, if the sin is of the type that carries neither the penalty of karet, spiritual extinction of the soul, or that of the hands of heaven, in which case the divine soul does not completely perish and is not entirely cut off from its source in the living God, except that through this sin, its attachment to its source and its connection with it has been weakened somewhat. In the case of such sin, the Alter Rebbe concludes, after a parenthetical note, the animal soul and the body can rise out of the klippah and unite with the holiness of the divine soul. The Rebbe says, what God does, the effect is the same no matter what we do. The punishment, sometimes the punishment is lashes. Sometimes it's karet. Karet means the person will die once they reach the age of 50, anytime. Amita b'dei shamayim, heavenly death by heavenly court, is between 50 and 60. He will live up to 60 years of age. The reason that happens is when they once separated from God, God decided that that's the type of punishment, which is a condition that God allows us to correct. God does not take the life right away. He gives us enough time to do teshuvah, and we can do teshuvah by bringing. At the time of the temple, they would bring sacrifices as atonement to restore life. And today it's through teshuvah of crying and fasting. There's a whole process. Says the Rebbe, but the separation from God is done equally in all of them. The difference between, on one end, the sins carrying this penalty of karet, or that of at the hands of heaven, and other sins is explained elsewhere as follows. The connection of the divine soul with its godly source is comparable to a rope woven of 613 strands, each strand representing one of the commandments. Every sin severs a corresponding strand. When one strand is broken, the entire rope is weakened, but not severed entirely. The penalties of karet, or death, by the hands of the heaven, however, cut the rope entirely, so to speak. Let me just explain very briefly about karet. According to Kabbalah, God gave us 613 commandments. He gave us a cable made out of 613 strands. When I break one law, I cut off one of those 613, but I have 612. When I break another law, another one of them, another one of them. What happens if a sin was a severe sin that's called karet. Karet meaning living up to 50. It is such a sin that cut off the entire cable, all 613. And whatever is left in the pipe still gives me energy. So it may be left 10 years, maybe 5 years, maybe 30 years, but by the age of 50, it's guaranteed I won't live. What happens, mita b'dei shamayim, heavenly death by heavenly court, up to 60, meaning the cut was much closer to where God is, therefore I have more energy. Today, by the way, doesn't apply because, as we'll discuss it in another chapter, another section of Tanya, we derive our sustenance not from the holy cable, but from the unholy cable. And therefore, we can be cutting ourselves off on many occasions and still live till 100 and 120. But that's not the discussion here. Says the Rebbe that when the effect is cutting off ourselves from energy of God. Some serious sins will cut off the entire rope. Some sins, lashes, or a positive commandment or disobey, we're cutting one strand. We can always repent and fix it and reconnect, assuming we want to. In the following note, it's already past 8 o'clock. I don't want to chase you home. So we have no choice. We're going to continue in 2 weeks, God willing. I really wanted to finish today. I just want to show it you to conclude a parable of a famous rabbi, the Maggid of Kuznets. He said that imagine there was a very wealthy man, a millionaire who lived in town. He had a palace with 15 bedrooms and 3 stories house. The palace for people to see. One day, a neighbor, a resident of town, came to him and begged him to sell him his palace. And he said, sure, no way. Are you out of your mind? It took me 20 years to plan, to hire the best architects, and the drawing and the wallpaper came from Persia, and everything is, even all the money in the world you can buy. So he said, please, and he begged them for a few weeks. And the guy said, no way, I'm not going to sell you my house. I don't have anything else like that. Finally, the neighbors, the stranger turned to him and says, so you know what, you can do me another favor. Allow me to hang a nail in the house, somewhere in the house. So he got to get rid of him. He said, sure. So he allows him, the guy comes in, and in the hallway, somewhere on the side, he bangs a nail. Next morning, the guy is coming in, knocking on the door. The guard asks him, what are you here for? He says, I have a nail in the house. I want to hang my coat. So he hangs his coat, goes out. An hour later, he comes back knocking, what's now? I came to pick up my coat. And then he goes 4 times during the day. You know, it's hot, it's cold, it's raining. He comes back, he hangs an umbrella, then he hangs a coat. After 3 days, the host became crazy. He got a headache from the guy. He says, you know what? I have a side room with a separate entrance. Get that room. You can hang your coat over there. Now the guy is happy. The next morning, he's coming up with his 7 children to that room. And they're going to have breakfast in that room. Then the guy says to him, after 2 weeks, the children are in and out with the mud, with the boots, you know. After 2 weeks, the guy says, you know what? You can have the entire floor. I'm going to be in the 3rd floor. You keep the 1st floor. Now he's bringing his friends because he has the entire floor. Let's have a party. He keeps them up a whole night. They are having parties. They enjoy their life. Finally, after 3 weeks, I'm making it short. The rich man says, you know, keep the house to yourself. I'm moving out. I'm going to the Ritz across the street. Says the Maggid of Kuznets, this is exactly what happens with the evil inclination. He wants to conquer the human. He wants to take over. But you're not going to give him. Surely you're not. So he's begging, and he's driving you nuts, making you sick. And finally, when you go in at a weak point, he says, how about I hang one nail? A little bit small thing. And he says, okay, as long as you keep quiet. And we allow him from that hanging of the coat to end up giving the entire body. It's all, the nail itself is nothing. But are willing to let him in the house, even just for a nail, is not just the beginning, the end of everything. And that's the point of the rabbi here. don't look at the nail as one act and that's the end of it. That's the foolishness of the sota. It's the actual allowance or permit for that evil to enter my house. And therefore, it's just a matter of time before they conquer the entire house. We'll conclude right here and continue in 2 weeks, God willing. Thank you very much. Good
Thank
night.
you.
So the three grievance sins are, one of them are adultery. How can the shofet